So yeah, I'm going to go over our GIS mapping tool here. First, I want to just give a little bit of background, sort of why we're doing this. So over 13 million homes in the US rely on private wells, but a lot of those wells were built a long time ago. They're in disrepair. Some of them are completely failing. And so it's a big issue across the US. In Virginia, we had about 965 replacement well permits requested in 2020 alone. So a lot of wells that needing repairs or just having issues. And so along with just, age and other issues, there's also environmental hazards, which can impact the water quality of the well. So, thinking of pollutants that get into that well water and can cause issues. There's also the growing concern from climate change, things like sea level rise that are expected to cause even more well failures in those low-lying coastal areas across the US and also just in Virginia, we have a lot of those areas. And so that's sort of what we were focusing on with this project. We wanted to create a GIS mapping tool that would combine 4 different kinds of data. So first, just the locations of private and community wells in the area, the locations of environmental health hazards, climate change hazards, and reference data. And so with that, we can, do some analysis, see which wells or what hazards, do some targeting, identifying vulnerable wells, vulnerable areas. And this is a pilot project. We're starting with 4 counties, soon to be 5 counties in the Northern Neck general region of Virginia. I have them highlighted here if you're not familiar. So starting with those 4 counties. And all of this is provided for by a fund or a grant we received from the CDC. And I'm not going to read through all of this, but just this is a grant that is focused on environmental health capacity and using data-driven approaches to address well issues and well water quality issues. And so this is just one component of this grant, this GIS map. There's a number of other components that we've done at VDH, including doing some data importing into our database, adding more data on wells, going through our old records and getting them uploaded into our electronic database, doing data quality training and things like that to emphasize the importance of data quality when we're entering in this well data. So this is just one component of the grant. The methodology for creating this GIS mapping tool is pretty simple because essentially it's just combining a bunch of data together from different sources and just putting onto a map because we're not doing any analysis yet. But when we were out looking for that data, we were looking for high quality GIS data that was available for download. So, going to other state agencies' websites, seeing what they have that we can download, and then just combining everything together in GIS to get one map. And so we added a lot of different layers to this mapping tool so that we can do a lot of analysis, and that involved a ton of different sources. So going through, again, how I mentioned, we have those 4 different kinds of data here. We have the well locations. That data source there was several sources combined together. So first, VDH, the Office of Environmental Health Services, we oversee the implementation of the well permitting program throughout the state. And so we already had access to a lot of well permitting data. But then we also combined that with some local county data and data we got from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And I'll go over that in a little bit more detail in the next slide. Then we also had environmental hazard data. So that's anything that has the potential to impact that water quality for the well. All of that data came from our Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ. Next, the climate change hazard data. We had 2 different sources here. And again, that's anything that can impact that well stability or its ability to function. We had data from the Department of Emergency Management and from NOAA. And then finally, our reference data, we just had a couple layers here. We had some USGS land cover data and some parcel data from the Virginia Geographic Information Network. So I'm going to go general plan for the rest of this presentation. I'm going to go through all of the different layers we have here, just give a little overview, and then we'll get into looking at the actual map itself. But first, I want to go over the well location data because this was the most involved because we were combining several different sources of data together. We also have community wells and private wells mapped here. So community wells is any well that supplies water to 25 or more people with more than 14 service connections, whereas a private well is usually just less than that number. The Office of Drinking Water at VDH oversees the community well program. And so we got all of our data on the community wells from them. And then like I had mentioned before, the Office of Environmental Health Services, we oversee the private well permitting program. And so we have all of that data already, but it's incomplete since the database isn't that old and a lot of the records are still paper records. So in order to help improve our inventory of private wells, we also included some real estate assessment data. So when the local county governments do their assessments for tax purposes, sometimes they'll note if that property is on a well or not. And so essentially just using that data for those addresses and incorporating that in. And then the Virginia Institute of Marine Science has been a great partner to us, and they've been mapping wells in the area for a long time. And so we're always sharing data back and forth. So with our private well data, we essentially just combined all of these data sources together to get one map of all of the well locations. And so this is what the private and community well layers look like on the map. I will note all these screenshots that I'm sharing are from ArcGIS Pro, but when I get to actually showing the mapping tool, that's on Online. So it'll look a little bit different, but the data is still the same. So you can see, obviously, there's a lot more private wells than community wells, but we have all of them mapped for those 4 counties there. Then moving on to our environmental hazard data. So there's going to be a lot of layers here, but all of this data came from DEQ. First, we have the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit. So these are 9 different kinds of permits that they issue for some different types of pollution. And also one thing to note, with all of these layers that are publicly available, I have a download link. So if you are interested in downloading some of this data yourself, I'm not sure if Reem has the slides or not. If not, I can give them to her and you can just download all the data yourself. But so there's a couple of those VPDES outfalls in this area. Next, we have alternate water supplies. So these are carbon filtration units that are installed on a potable water supply. So it's not, these obviously aren't sources of pollution or an environmental hazard themselves, but they're a sign that there's a hazard in the area that this carbon filtration unit was necessary. So that's why we've included them. Next, we have registered petroleum tanks. This is a layer that includes both above ground and underground storage tanks. And so with these storage tanks, if they're leaking, that can impact water quality in the area. Next, we have the pollutant response program or PREP report locations. So this is any response to air, water, or waste pollution incidents in the area. And the idea with this is even if this incident happened in the past or just recently, it can still impact water quality in the area. So we wanted all of those on the map. Next, we have biosolid areas. So these are locations where biosolid is applied to the land, in agricultural settings, and if any runoff from these can be impacting the groundwater in the area. And then solid waste, sort of a similar deal. We have, solid waste facilities. They're kind of hard to see on the map. But there's, I don't know if you can see my mouse. There's a couple small little areas of solid waste facilities. And again, just like with the previous one, any leachate or runoff from these can impact water quality. And that's all of the environmental health hazard data I have, but I did want to mention a couple layers. We did want to include both the National Priority List Superfund sites and the non-national priority list federal facilities on this map, but we got the data and there just aren't any of these locations in these 4 counties because there's not a ton of them in the state to begin with. So for now, they're not on the map. It's something we wanted to include, but they're not on the map just because there aren't any in this area. Moving on to climate change hazard data. So we have some hurricane evacuation routes and then also just hurricane zones. These are areas that are going to be impacted a lot by extreme weather and also the flooding that can come along with hurricanes. And I sort of just color coded them just red to yellow, not as a sign of the severity of these different zones, just to help differentiate them. Next, we have flooding frequency. So these are areas that are associated with common coastal flood advisories. And with flooding, that can impact a well in 3 main ways. First, when the flood water runs over a well, it can contaminate the water within that well, with whatever stuff it's bringing with it. Can also erode sensitive parts of the well, when it's bringing sediment and running over the well, that can impact the functionality of the well in that regard. And then you can also just have the complete loss of function of the well itself, or just the well gets completely destroyed by frequent flooding. And so it's a pretty big concern, definitely something we wanted to get on the map there. Next, we have sea level rise. So we have 1 feet, 2 feet, and 3 feet of sea level rise. And I have them all put on the map at the same time. And since they, mostly overlap, you can't quite see 2 feet or 3 feet, except if you look kind of towards the south, you can see where they extend a little bit further into the land than 1 foot of sea level rise. And again, for these areas, you're going to see a lot more flooding, and they may eventually be that you can't install a well there at all, as we see more sea level rise over the coming years. And moving on finally to our reference data, we had 2 different reference data layers. So these aren't hazards, they're just things we wanted to include for analysis purposes. So first I have the land cover data from USGS, and there's originally 16 different categories in that data set, but I just simplified it down to 4, just make things a little more straightforward. So we have just open body of water. We have developed land, so roads, sidewalks, all of that, it's all developed land, herbaceous or any sort of forest or grass cover, and then agricultural land. And then finally, we have some parcel layers. These are always important for just identifying the property boundaries for a given address, because, you want to see, we have a well at this location, but is there anywhere else on the property that we can install a well that's maybe not in a vulnerable area? So always good to have this for analysis purposes. Some limitations I want to point out with the data, now that we've gotten through all of it, there are some issues with some of the data being out of date or out of sync with each other. Since most of this data was provided by outside sources, some of it maybe hasn't been updated in a while, and so it could contradict each other, so something to keep in mind with this data set. The private well locations are not the exact locations of the wells, because we don't have that information. What we do is we take the address and we geocode it. So the point that you're seeing on the map is associated with that address. So it's close enough for analysis purposes, but it's not the exact location of the well on that property, just a general location. And then finally, there are always going to be some data quality issues, especially when we have this much data. So I have here the VPGES outfall layer. I don't know if any of you noticed, but one of them is out here on the Chesapeake Bay, which it probably shouldn't be. So that could have been an issue with the data itself, or just something that happened when I projected it onto the map, but always going to have data quality issues like that. So now that we have this GIS mapping tool, our next steps is, one of them, or first and foremost, is to add more data. So we have some well water sample information. So just, for the community wells, they regularly sample that water. And so they've, ODW has given us that, that data so that we can, try to incorporate it into the map. So, like testing for different pollutants like arsenic, things like that, all of those tests that they do. We're also planning on adding septic locations to this map. So just like how VDH oversees the well permitting program, we also oversee the septic permitting program. So we also have that data. And just like how I said, we supplemented the well data with the real estate assessment data. We've also done that with the septic systems. So it'll be mapped in a lot of the same way. And septic systems are important to get on the map, because if you have a septic system that's failing or in disrepair, is leaching in some way, that can impact a nearby well. So it's important to note where those are too. And then finally, with continued funding for this project, we plan to expand it to additional counties or statewide. Like I mentioned, we have a 5th county that I'll be adding on soon. But then other than that, we also just want to see how much we can map it for the whole state, since a lot of these outside sources of data, they're available for the whole state. And in terms of how it's going to be used, that's sort of why I'm here presenting. So we'll be passing this on to our data partners. So those people at the local health districts, some planning district commissions, so that they can use it and they can do their analysis. They can see where these wells are located, identify any wells that are near hazards that they need to maybe act on, or identify whole areas that they want to, prioritize with some funding to, do some infrastructure improvement, or, just have this available to educate their communities about the risks that are impacting their wells and why maybe they need to, think about where their well is going to go when they're constructing a new property. Just whatever ways that they can use it to help their communities and plan for future drinking water supplies that are safer and more equitable. And so with that, I will get to the GIS mapping tool. I'm going to click over in a second, but I want to give a little explanation. We have 2 different links because with our well location, since that's personally identifiable information, we have to be a little bit more cautious and protective of that data and exactly where those wells are located. So we have a ARC Enterprise version that is available only to VDH employees. You can only access it if you're on the network or on the VPN. I've been told that if you're at other state agencies, you can still access it, like if you're not at VDH, if you're at DEQ, but I haven't gotten a chance to test that if that's true or not. But that's the first link, and that has all of the data on it. The second link is the link that's available to the full public. Anybody can access it. And so the only real limit, again, with the personally identifiable information, is we've limited the extent of the 2 well layers, the private and community wells. So you just can't zoom in all the way to know exactly where those are located. So that's the only real difference between the 2, other than just how you access them. So if you're a VDH employee, if you needed to share it with somebody outside of VDH, you can send them the public link. And if you mess up and send them the wrong one, you don't have to worry about it because they can't access it anyways. So with that, I'm going to hop over to Chrome, where I've already got them open. And I can also post the links in the chat. If anybody wants to follow along with me here. I got link 1, that's the VDH version. And then link to the public version. Okay. So this first link I'm showing, this is the VDH version of the map. This is what you'll see when you open it up. A little disclaimer just explaining what this map is and our sources. You can just go ahead and close that out. And so we just have this in sort of a basic map viewer. You can zoom in, see all the different points. So I've got a couple of them mapped here. We have this layer, minimize this off. We have this layer section over here. You can turn certain layers on and off. So you don't want to see all those private wells. You can turn that off. But I have all of the data that I just went over. So we have the community private wells, all of the environmental hazard data. I've got that all turned on right now. We have the hurricane information, sea level rise. Here, let me turn that off real quick. So you can see some of them take a little longer to load, but you can see 1 foot of sea level rise. And then I was saying, if I turn on 2 feet, you can see where it extends a little bit further. And then we also have the reference data, the parcels and land cover. I'm not going to turn those on though, because they take a very long time to load. But yeah, you can just play around with the map. We've got a couple different tools that you can use. There's a measuring tool if you want to measure, say, how far is this community well from the sea level rise area. So we've got this little measuring distance tool you can use to measure that. Do some just, basic analysis. So that's 0.6 miles away. We also, there's a little print function if you want to print a screenshot of the map. Wait for it to load. You just give you just go to the extent that you want to take a screenshot of or a picture of, give it a name. So I called it sea level rise, and then you can hit print. It'll take a little minute to do that. Yeah, so this is the VDH version, and you can tell again by the links. It'll have that vdh.virginia.gov. So that's so you can tell them apart. And it also has a blue banner up here. Okay, so the printout's done. So you click that little printout button. It'll open up a PDF of your map. So you can see it adds a scale, a title, that title you gave it and everything. So it's pretty handy to have. And then I'm going to switch over to the publicly available map. So this one's a little bit of a work in progress. We're having a hard time getting one of the layers to show up, but otherwise it's the same map. Just it's got a red banner here to just help differentiate them. It has all the same layers, but just like I said, for the private and community wells, you'll see them, they're all mapped right now because I'm pretty zoomed out pretty far. So if I zoom in more, you'd still see them, right? But if I zoom in even closer than that, they just disappear because we don't want to show exactly where they are on the map. So still we'll be able to do, some larger scale analysis there, but just to protect that personally identifiable information, we just have to limit that extent there. But yeah, and one thing to note on this, I'll just refresh it so you can see when you first load it, it's going to ask you to sign in to ArcGIS Online. You can just ignore that and just hit click cancel. It'll still pop up. And this, yeah, also has a disclaimer, same disclaimer, but yeah, you can close out of that. Yeah, that's all I have here. If anybody has any questions, I see there's some Q&A questions.
Great.
Okay, so Nicholas asked about the real estate assessment data. So it was really county by county how I was able to get this data. Some of it was available online. Like every county, you go to their county website. Sometimes a lot of them would have like a real estate assessment page where you could type in an address and get information on that address. And in terms of getting my data, it was a lot of just reaching out and asking people, do you have this information? And so then they'd send me, addresses with whether it has a well or not, or whether it has a septic system or not. So it really depended on the counties. I did not find any like statewide public real estate database or anything like that. It's not really available at the state level, which is why we're kind of having to go through this whole process. But yeah, you just go to the county websites and just ask them directly for data. Next, we have a question from Bridget. Would the outfall/discharges to surface water be expected to affect well water quality? Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I'm not an expert on that sort of thing. That's why we've got it mapped. Oh, and I should, actually, let me switch to my PowerPoint real quick. I've just got a little question slide. With my email, if you have additional questions after this, and then also joining us in this presentation is Scott Vogel, who is our private well program coordinator. So he can definitely answer more questions about the grant itself, and then also about the well program than I can. So if you need to jump in at all, Scott, just let me know.
Yeah, sure. Just for that question, so these are permitted facilities under DEQ. So, I mean, they're expected that they're in compliant with like a general permit that's issued for them, and that general permit, has a level with which they're discharging, for different pollutants. So, I mean, in general, there could be an impact there. Hopefully not, if they're properly, hopefully it's all been calculated in the permit and everything. But it's there because it's a potential for sure.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, then we have a question from Derek. Are you mapping drinking water wells only? This is mostly drinking wells, right, Scott? We don't really have a lot of irrigation wells.
I am not sure on that one. This might be all of the wells that we have with VDH. I mean, a majority of them are in most areas would be drinking water wells. I think we're mapping everything in our database. So we do have irrigation wells. We've got some industrial wells, and some geothermal wells on there as well. So I'm not sure if those have been separated out or not.
Yeah, I didn't separate it out when I was pulling data, so it would be on there.
So that's something we might look at later down the road, is to be able, I mean, I'd like to keep them all on there, but maybe separate like a different color or something for irrigation wells, because it would be good to see that.
And we have a question from Brian about doing a similar projections for on-site wastewater. So I did mention we are trying to incorporate septic systems into this map, and then VIMS, who I mentioned before, they also have a project that they're doing with us that's sort of a similar map that is more focused on climate change and mapping septic systems. So they have septic systems mapped, and also they have a sort of a heat map going of potential areas impacted by flooding, to sort of see how those different septic systems in the same area, in the Three Rivers Health District area, to see how those are impacted by climate change. So something that'll be incorporated into this map, the septic system locations, but then we also have this other project with VIMS that's doing something pretty similar.
The VIMS project has also allowed people to input some data to it too from the health department. So like if they know of a troubled area, they can kind of circle it and kind of get that mapped as part of that problem area.
Next question we have from anonymous attendee. So how difficult was it to get information from outside organizations, and how good was that data? So for most of the GIS layers, it wasn't very difficult. A lot of it's just available online. Like I can go ahead and just click on one of the DEQ links. Show you guys what that looks like. They have a whole hub for their GIS data, which is pretty much where all of this came from. And it's as simple as just downloading it. How good the data is, I mean, it's hard to say exactly without doing like a full audit. I was seeing some issues, like I mentioned, with that VPDES outfalls, where it was just showing up in the Chesapeake Bay, even though it shouldn't have. And I couldn't figure out why. So there are some issues like that. And also some of these, this one looks like it's been updated recently, but some of them haven't been updated in a while either. For the getting the real estate assessment data, that has been a lot of work. We've been doing that for over a year now. It's not hard, it's just tedious to go to every single county and ask them for data. And Haroon asked if the versions are accessing the same database at the back end, or they have, so yeah, so they're accessing the same layers. And the way it's set up, I didn't set it up, or a GIS guy set up the public map. When I update the VDH version of the map, it'll automatically update the publicly available one, right? Or there's a time lag. It'll update regularly. So yeah, they're pulling from the same layers. So any updates to one will impact both. So yeah, they're pretty much the same. It's just the extent's limited on that publicly available one. Sean, did you request or have releases from private well owners to display on the map? No, we've never had to request releases from private well owners, which is why we're limiting the extent on that publicly available map, just to, I guess, kind of keep everything on board in that regard. Because it's data we've gotten, you know, when they submitted their permits to get the wells installed. And so just to sort of prevent that issue where, you know, keeping the extent limited, and then also I haven't figured out how to get the metadata to show up for the maps. But in the metadata and like the attribute tables, I've removed all the addresses and everything. So we don't have to worry about that either. And for the map that's available to VDH, most of the local health districts, they all have access to the same data. So we're not really releasing it to anybody new there. And Brian also asked, are there layers for future sea level rise that are sparking conversations about infrastructure development now? It's somebody who's not part of like planning district commission meetings or anything. I don't know that I can really speak to that. I know this is something that a lot of people have really been looking for. All right, you have anything to add there, Scott?
Yeah, the area that we're looking at here with this map, they are updating their resiliency plan. So they were pretty excited to see that we've got this tool. And I don't remember, I think we were being fairly conservative, right, with our sea level rise model that we have.
Yeah.
So you know, there's definitely potential to you know, to look at this with even like beyond 3 foot and you know, see the huge impacts. But even at the 3 foot level, even at the 1 foot level, it's pretty significant. You know, there's definitely impacts that you can see.
Yeah, the NOAA data, they go up to 10 feet of sea level rise. And I think we had seen somewhere that 1 to 3 feet is sort of what's predicted for now. So that's what we went with. And also, yeah, to be conservative, but.
Yeah, I've seen some photos from the Planning Commission of, you know, flooding events in this area. And it's just crazy to see, you know, some of the areas that you'd never expect to be underwater that, you know, are underwater with increasing frequency now.
Okay, then we have a question from Bridget on what scale are we hiding the wells for privacy purposes? When I set up the map, it didn't give me an exact scale. It was sort of just a slider. So I went with my best judgment of at what point you could, you know, note the exact address where a well is located. And I can't, the map viewer doesn't let you control the zoom too much. So I can't figure out the exact scale, but you can kind of see it's in between this, which doesn't look like this is much of a scale other than that's a mile. It's not super helpful, you know, versus you zoom in one more and then they all disappear. So yeah, just trying to, I think it said it was sort of like a city level is where the wells all kind of disappear. Because you could start to see smaller roads here. You can start to see, you could probably figure out an exact address at this point. So this is where I cut it off. And I mean, this whole map is still pretty new and part of, you know, we've just started sharing it. So we're still doing a little bit of troubleshooting. So maybe we'll change exactly where it cuts off, but this is just based on what I thought would be the best limit. Okay, I think we got through all the questions that were in there. It was a lot of questions. Thanks for all the good questions. Oh, I got another question from Eric. Will speak to plans to add any layers relevant. Yeah, so one layer I didn't mention is we want to try to get some census data added to this map. And so, yeah, we're trying to look at some environmental justice data and how that could be incorporated as well. At the very least, we want the census data layers on there because that's pretty important. And yeah, just seeing what we can get that's easily available, you know, and can be added to the map, basically.
I just want to reiterate the question that came in that Megan just responded to in case anyone was wondering. Eric was asking, will you speak to any plans to add layers relevant to social determinants of health and well water quality? So thank you for that. Excellent questions, and thank you for those detailed responses, Megan and Scott. Are there any other questions? If not, we can segue into another part of this webinar. We'd like to gather feedback from anybody who's attended the webinar today regarding the GIS tool from the perspective of if you had developed something like this for your organization. I'm speaking specifically to those that are working at state, local, tribal, and territorial health departments. You know, if you have any comments on how effective or efficient this tool might be, we just want to capture some of your thoughts so we can use those to improve the tool further. So I just dropped a link in the chat for Slido, since I think that's the best way to capture feedback from folks live. So go ahead and click on that link, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen that shows you what is the passcode and the code that you can use in order to access the poll. Sure. I'm gonna go ahead and share this. Sorry, bear with me. There you go. So go ahead and click on that link that I just dropped in the chat. For the code, you can enter the code that you see up on the screen. I believe it'll just ask you for the passcode. The passcode is NEHA 22. In the meantime, Megan, as folks are getting on, do you want to answer the one question that just James asked? I think he just put it in the Q&A box.
Yes. Okay, so James had a question about adding well water quality data. I don't know if the question got cut off, but it is something we want to add. Like I had mentioned, we have for the community wells, we have data on the water samples that they take for the community wells, which they do pretty regularly, that we want to incorporate. For private wells, there's not as much data available. That is something we're sort of working on with Virginia Tech. Does a lot of private well sampling. They do a lot of that sort of sampling. We're trying to get that incorporated if it's possible. But at the very least, we have the community well water data, and so we'll be getting that added on for those. Oh, finish there. So yeah, to identify problem areas. Yeah, it's definitely something we're considering. At the very least, we have it for the community well data. It's just a matter of for the private wells, it's It's not something that's done regularly at the state level. And we have to work with partners and make sure we're doing everything that it's their data, they're protective of it. Make sure we're presenting it based on how they, what their standards are.
Thanks, Megan. And thanks, James, for that question. It looks like a lot of folks were able to access the Slido. The first question that I put up here is, which primary stakeholders or partners might benefit from knowing about this tool? So I do see a lot of folks mentioning community planners, and I really appreciate the detailed responses some folks are putting in. So I'll give people another maybe 30 seconds to add some additional responses here. And I'm just going to read out briefly from some of the responses. I see builders and homeowners, a regulatory state, county, local agency responsible for protection of water resources, watershed coalitions also dedicated to protecting water, well water, the source water, and connecting with stakeholder demos of tools. Emergency preparedness coordinators is another popular response that I'm seeing quite a bit. And home buyers, real estate developers. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to go ahead and launch the next question, which is, are there any gaps regarding EH hazards that the tool ought to address / include? So anything that you that Megan covered as part of the tool, did you notice there were any gaps that we ought to include to make the tool more comprehensive?
Reem, somebody asked if you could share the Slido screen so people can see the responses. Not sure if you can do that.
Sure, let me try this. So let me just go ahead and actually share a different screen because I am seeing the responses up here live. Are you folks seeing that? I'm sorry, the text is a bit tiny. I might actually be able to address that here. I hope that's better. Okay, so again, like you see, we are getting some responses as far as gaps, mining hazards, dam quality, socioeconomic status data, wildfire vulnerability. Although we did talk about this, I don't think wildfire is a concern for Virginia. Active versus remediated hazardous waste sites. Excellent. Thank you so much for that input. All right, we'll give maybe 10 more seconds before we move on to the next question here. Industrial or agricultural land use data. Emergency planning layers, that's interesting.
A lot of good suggestions.
All right, that seems to have slowed down. Okay, maybe we'll give folks a couple more seconds. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. This one's pretty simple. It's a yes or no question. If you do have any further feedback on in what way, you can feel free to add that in your response. Are the inputs contributing to the tool's goal of raising awareness on EH hazards in hope of mitigating them? Do you feel like the tool does a good job of addressing that awareness piece? And if you do feel like we might be able to do a better job, feel free to share in what way. I see that. Thanks for that feedback. Climate factors is addressed. Perhaps we could do more for EH factors. And outreach is going to be quite critical for this. I agree. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next. Wait, let's see. Let's give folks some more time. We are getting some responses. I really like this comment. It's hard to link all the layers into one awareness message. That is true.
I do like the comment about testing wells too, because if you don't know it, Virginia does not have any testing requirements beyond when the well is constructed. So homeowners are on their own once the well is there, to do their own water testing and manage their own water source.
All right, let's move on to the next question. Do you think the GIS tool offers useful applications for emergency planning? If so, how? I think some of this was covered already. It does seem like folks are in agreement that this tool could be used for emergency planning. In fact, it is part of why this was built. But we are curious to see how it might be used. If there are any thoughts specifically. Flooding, sure. Yep, the tool does link the well locations to sources of contamination. Should there be like a spill or some kind of an industrial incident, definitely relevant. All right. Maybe we'll give folks a couple more seconds. Pre-planning for flooding events, staging of alternative water sources, testing supplies. Great feedback. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. And this one's regarding how accessible the tool might be to stakeholders. Do you think, is it simple enough to be able to be used by stakeholders? Do we go ahead and, ensure that some basic training is provided? So would stakeholders need to receive some basic training to be able to navigate the tool? And any recommendations on that, if you do think a training would be needed? So a brief overview would be helpful, but the tool is meant to be intuitive. I do see that it is self-explanatory. Training is helpful. A web page or an info sheet. Yep. Pop-up guides. All right, I do want to be mindful of time. We've got like 3 more minutes and I do want to cover the remainder of the 2 questions. So let's just take maybe 10 seconds to wrap up any thoughts on that question so we can move on to the next. Thank you all so much for your feedback. All right, the next question is, what could VDH do to make the tool more accessible? Of course, outreach and marketing is going to be quite important on this one. So press releases, social media, informing the public, promoted widely to key stakeholders. How-to guides. Put a link on the VDH website. Open it for embedding into other organizations' websites.
Yeah, I think that's the setting you can add allow it to be embedded.
All right, let's take a quick 10 seconds and get to the last question here. What could VDH do to make the tool more effective and efficient? So I'm going to go ahead and launch this one. This is the last question. So beta testing is going to be important on this one. Yep. Keeping the data current and accurate. And as those responses are coming, I want to give Megan and Scott an opportunity to provide any closing comments as part of their presentation or some of the responses they might have seen on these Slido questions.
And I'll just say thank you all for coming to the presentation. It was a ton of very good questions, and all of this feedback has been great so far. A lot of things to consider and ways we can improve this. So yeah, thank you all for your contributions.
I'll just echo that. I agree 100%. This is a lot of really great feedback. And feel free to contact me for any questions about our program in Virginia, or for any private web questions. And I'm sure Megan would be happy to help with any questions about the tool.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Megan and Scott, for Megan for the presentation. Scott, thank you so much for supporting and answering some of the questions here. And I want to thank all of the participants, especially those who provided the feedback on Slido and asking excellent questions. I appreciate your participation, and hoping that you will join the second webinar of the series, which is next week on Monday. So hope to see you then. Thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.